I think spiritually people have forgotten how to see. People only look at everything. I've often had people with me and, just maybe a small group and, teach them how to see and not just to look, because we look, but we're not taking in everything we actually see.
Hello, friends. Welcome. Sounds True One friends. I'm here today with a very special Insights at the Edge, Lorna Byrne, who's joining us from Thomastown, Ireland. Let me tell you just a little bit about Lorna. She was born in Dublin and relates that she has seen angels since she was a baby. We're going to be talking about that, what it's like to enter into the world, I'll call it the spirit world, the spirit sensitive world that Lorna lives in. Lorna has written 7 best-selling books, including Angels in My Hair, A Message of Hope from the Angels, and Angels at My Fingertips. Her work has been published in more than 50 countries and in 30 languages worldwide. And this is particularly remarkable, and we'll hear more about this, as Lorna herself is dyslexic. She never learned formally how to read and write, and all of these books were created through her voicing the words that then became printed in the books. Lorna is also a peace ambassador and a philanthropist. She founded the Lorna Byrne Children's Foundation and also a foundation called the Seraph Foundation, which is developing a sanctuary in Ireland for people of all backgrounds and beliefs to come together and develop and evolve spiritually. Lorna, welcome.
I thank you so much for having me here, and I say welcome to all of your audience as well. And I hope they get inspired spiritually while we chat and talk together.
And as promised, I want to begin by entering your world. I think most of us live in predominantly a physical world, or maybe a mental world, an emotional world, but we don't necessarily live with what we might call spiritual sight. So tell me what it's like inside you, being Lorna Byrne. What do you see, feel, sense when you, like right now, right here in this conversation?
Well, right here now in this conversation, I'm just saying to myself, I can't see your guardian angel because we're on screen. That very rarely happens. But I know if we were in the same room together, I would, and probably see other angels or maybe souls of loved ones in and around you as well. To me, it's normal. I don't know anything else in that way. When I see people out on the street or someone passing my house, I see the angels with them as well. And that's normal for me. I find it hard to understand what it's like for you, only seeing people. To me, that's how come they can only see people? Why can't everyone spiritually see as I see? And I know I'm seeing through the eyes of my soul as well as my human eyes. But I do find it hard living in the human world. I always did. I find humanly it hard to understand human beings. And I hope that's helping you. It's like, from the moment, I always say, from the moment I opened my eyes as an infant in the cot, seeing angels, but not knowing they were angels, and trying to reach up and touch them to play. It was only when maybe I was about 2.5 or 3, roughly, I can never guess exactly, when I was playing with my brother in front of the fire, and he had his back to the fire, and the fire was blazing, and he said, the fire doesn't bother him. So we were playing with little blocks my dad had made, little wooden blocks. And it was when our hands touched, that was the most exciting time. When our hands touched, it was like as if his hand went into mine or mine went into his, and it all sparkled. And I know I laughed because I felt such joy and such love, but it was at that moment the angels that were around us told me that my brother, who I believe my mom and dad could see him, I didn't realize he wasn't flesh and blood, that he had died before I was born, and that I must keep it a secret. I mustn't let anyone know that I see them or see the soul of my brother, and they were always reminding me of that. And at times, I still see him today. I still see my brother today. But at times when I was little and living in Old Kilmainham with my parents, my mom would be asleep in this big, huge chair in front of the fire. She'd just fall asleep. And then I would see my brother asleep in her arms, but he'd only be an infant. And you have to remember, I was so young, I didn't question anything. To me, that's normal. It's so normal. And I suppose I wouldn't change my life for anything, and even when I got older, they have taught me everything spiritually out in nature. I could go across the mountains and I'd come back safe, and they would be teaching me how to see. I think spiritually people have forgotten how to see. People only look at everything. I've often had people with me and, just maybe a small group, and, teach them how to see and not just to look, because we look, but we're not taking in everything we actually see. And I think it is that God and the angels just taught me how to see. Like every day I was at school, with them every single day, 24 hours a day, probably even when I'm sleeping. And I know it's the connection to my soul, that spark of light of God, and that's extremely powerful. We don't realize, how would I say that intertwining happen, between the human being and the soul. If we'd let it happen more, you would be able to see then all I see, and maybe even
now,
more.
There's so much, Lorna, in what you've already said. There's so much in what you've said, because I think for a lot of people who have lost loved ones, the thought, the potential that they could connect with their loved one in any kind of ongoing way is a huge longing that they have, and also a whole lot of disbelief. So here where you're talking about your little brother and you're saying that you still have a relationship with him, help us understand in the world of Lorna Byrne, what happens when people die? Where do they go? Is your little brother still young? Did he grow and evolve? Why didn't he cross over? Did he cross over? And you're meeting with his spirit. How do you see this?
I suppose maybe that's a lot you've said there.
Yes, I have. Sorry, I'm just trying to get out. There's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, my little brother, he died at 10 weeks, and he did pass over. That's the incredible thing. Every soul does pass over. And I know humanly we use that word. It's like the soul becomes free from the human body. And I know I use the word heaven because that's the word that's used humanly, in that way. But your loved one, what I say to every parent, and anyone who has lost a loved one, they're not dead. you're they I don't know why or when, in a sense, God fell in love with us and gave us that tiny little spark of light of itself, you know, and I don't know when that happened, but because that happened, that's the spiritual part of us. We as human beings kind of say the human part and the spiritual part, we're keeping them separate. It's like, let them come together, let them intertwine, and I know, like, the soul of a loved one, and depending on how close you were with them in every way, you scent them when they're in and around you. You feel their presence, but you deny it because the world has been telling people for centuries, you're crazy, you're mad, in that way, but you do sense your loved one. I hear from so many people who would say, you know, that smell came into the house for a moment. I know my child was in and around me. The toy that has been missing for so long appeared, and that's the soul of your child letting you know. Like, it was when I told my mom after Angels in My Hair was written and published, you know, she she cried and she said, I wish she had known that, because he died at 10 weeks. And, you know, she was told negative things from the church as such, which was so sad, because her child was so young. And even though he had got christened, it was like, you're not allowed to talk about him anymore. Forget about it. It never happened. And I suppose way back then in Ireland, he was buried in what was called, the babies' burial ground, and that means loads of children were buried there. There wasn't something individually that you could go to. It's unmarked in that way. And she just said, even, aunts and neighbors and all, nobody ever talks about a loved one that we have lost. And we should, because they're not dead. We just miss the human touch. But everyone will see their loved one when your time comes. But let that not be for a long, long time, because human life is precious. But you have a soul. It's like, it's like acknowledging that spark of light that's inside you, that fills every part of you, and yet is, out there as well in that way. And I know my voice is going a bit funny, so forgive that. But it's like, it's to become conscious that you have a soul, become conscious that you have a guardian angel. You may call your guardian angel something else, but it's the one angel that is the gatekeeper of your soul and never, never leaves you. And at the moment of death, what I have seen so many times, even at a road accident, the guardian angel, it's like, how can I describe it? I know when I say reach into the human body, that's not really it. But it's like the guardian angel, straight away at that very, very moment, everything spiritually. If you never believed you had a soul, or you never believed in angels or God, or, or anything, at that very second, when your human body dies, that, you are a spiritual being, everything. And I know that is incredible, but why don't we as human beings start to accept before that happens and discover so much more, start to be able to see, and even to be able to see the soul of a loved one, even your child, like my mom had said, sometimes when, just as she would wake in that chair, she would feel there was something in her arms. It's to to acknowledge it. And I think spiritually we're still very afraid, and yet we're so open, we're so hungry, we're so thirsty. We want to know more.